guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got investigative journalist Jon Rappoport. I'd love to say just investigative journalist, but you've done so much throughout your career. He's written articles, he blogs, he's done radio, he's been in multiple documentaries I've seen him in. One that I've talked a lot about on the show, State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. And he's written books, AIDS Inc., The Scandal of the Century, and a bunch of other things. So it just, it's really, I'm a huge fan, Jon. You've been doing this longer than I've been alive. So it's awesome to finally talk to you and have you on.
Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
And I actually, you studied philosophy right in my backyard. I'm actually from Massachusetts, not that far from Amherst, and I know that you studied philosophy at Amherst College. So
yeah, a long time ago. That was in the late 1950s, and the whole deal at that point was Western philosophy. Nobody even paid any attention to philosophy from the East, from any other part of the world. But the one great thing about it was they had a professor named Joe Epstein who taught logic. And he became kind of a friend. We had many conversations together. And, at that time the furthest thing from my mind was that I was going to, work in journalism. But years later, when I started to, I realized that all of that really stood me in good stead, because part of that is knowing what you don't know, which was a piece of advice that he gave me, and then finding out, what the answers are. And the other thing is, can you follow a line of reasoning? Most people don't even know what that is. And if they do, they can't. But in analyzing even material that you don't have any technical expertise in, you can recognize when people fail to make a case, or they contradict themselves, or they assume upfront what they're trying to prove, or they're faking it, or they're trying to use different methods of what used to be called logical fallacies to, skirt the truth and evade discovery, shall we say. So all of that suddenly came into play for me, and I found that I could use it to good effect.
Yeah, I think there's a link between, because I know you have you're very much into art, for the listeners who don't know, and I've heard you talk about imagination and art and all this stuff, and that's one thing that I on this show I kind of have all different types of artists, from writers to comedians to musicians to and alternative media people. And it's funny because I'm always thinking to myself, I'm like, what's this link? Why do I, because at heart I got music. I was a musician, and then I got into all these other things and researching and stuff like that. I'm like, what's this link between the two? And I think they both tap into something. They both tap into, and same thing with philosophy. I think that there's a reason why musicians and artists are really into philosophy. There's something about searching for, I guess, truth, for a lack of a better word, or just trying to make sense of things, trying to find the puzzle pieces to put the picture together and make sense of life or our purpose, trying to find fulfillment. And was that something with you? Do you think that they're kind of the same things are tugging at you that make you intrigued with art as in alternative media and philosophy and all these other things?
Yeah, I think there's connections, no question about it. I guess the way I would put it is logic can tell you what the lies are. In other words, there are people in this world who have a great deal of power that are trying to invent reality for everybody else. And that's true in every area of life. For example, I've focused on the medical to a great degree over the years as an example of that. And to invent this fake reality, these elite power players need to employ some, facsimile of logic, reasonability. And when you start poking holes in all of that, then you realize that the entire facade that they're selling, the invented reality, is fake. But now, on the other hand, you as an individual should be able to take a sense of power from that rather than a sense of futility or a sense of, what am I going to do now and all of that. Because, and this is where imagination comes in, you invent reality. You create better reality. So the two work hand in hand. You destroy the sense of authenticity in all the fake realities, and then using your own imagination, you create realities that you really want. And that's a theme that I've repeated many times in many different ways from many different angles in writing that I've been doing over the last 30 years. That people have to get both sides of that equation in order to really understand what's going on, not just in the world, but in themselves.
And do you think that's one of the reasons why the school system seems like it always seems like the first thing that gets cut is art and stuff like, and there's not enough I guess money or time invested in these other types of ways of thinking, because imagination, I always found it really intriguing because like you said, when you get lost in something when you're doing work and you kind of create a new reality, but you also have in that creating that new reality in your mind when you're lost in a painting or a song or whatever, when you come back to reality, it seems like you have a better understanding of the current reality. And do you think that it's actually a ploy to try to stop people from creative thinking and critical thinking and really just kind of make us producing zombies?
Absolutely. The real reason that all these arts programs are deleted from schools and so forth is because the people who are doing the deleting, the people that run the budgets and all of that, they're behaving like machines. They think like machines. They want to indoctrinate students into being machines. So they look at the curriculum and they say, okay, machine, yeah, good machine, yeah, good machine. Well, what is this? What's this shit over here? Art. What does that have to do with machines? Nothing. So let's get rid of that. Now, they don't do that consciously necessarily, but that's really the root of what's going on. That's why all these programs get, deleted from schools. And as far as what you're talking about, inventing reality, absolutely true about art, no question about it. And how doing art allows you to come back to the world and see it much more clearly. But also, as part of imagination and invention, is creating realities that are, new social realities, new political realities, new economic, financial realities that have to do with health. In every possible field that you can, discover, imagination has the cardinal place there. And you could say that governments, like school educators, are also machines. They're looking for machine solutions all the time because they want to turn the world into that image of being one gigantic machine. That's what they're really about. I don't care what they say, what they do, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, the bulk of all politicians on the planet, that's what they're after. That's the only way they can see to survive themselves and to have society survive as a machine, where all the people are cogs in the wheels and everything interlocks and everything is planned and laid out. And more and more, that's the direction that we're moving in. A coercive machine. Obey this, do that. If we tell you this, believe it. You know, that's the wave that keeps on coming.
Yeah, I feel like art inspires you to kind of tap into what makes you an individual. Like you tap.
Yeah, absolutely. You break out of the machine.
Yeah, and I feel like most of our lives or most of our day, we're being told what to think, what makes somebody smart, what doesn't, you know, what time to wake up in the morning, you know, what we should eat, like all these things. So we have these just guidelines. And then the beautiful thing I always liked about writing music or playing music or even just enjoying any type of art was just it kind of let your imagination go wherever it wanted to go, and you really felt like you were tapping into what made you special as an individual and not just like, you know, a sheep going along with the herd.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagination has no rules. Now, that scares a lot of people. Oh, yes, it does. And oh, yes, it's got to follow along certain. No, it doesn't. Absolutely not.
Well,
you make it up as you go along.
Yeah, and it shouldn't have any rules because I've had musicians on the show, and one thing we've always talked about was, you know, just how anybody who restricts the creative process with either painting or writing music, and you're like, oh, I this type of artist, or I create this type of genre of music, and then once you put borders on that and you restrict the creative process, where instead of going where the creativity or your imagination takes you and you put borders on it, then it becomes not as good, not as inspiring piece of art compared to just going wherever it takes you. And so I think that's important. I think it's important to kind of go wherever it takes you and stuff. And somebody like you who you lived through the psychedelic times where people were messing around with LSD and acid and stuff like that. I always wondered, you know, I always had this theory that the big war on drugs was a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of those psychedelics, just like art, made you look at things from outside the box, and you were less likely to be tricked, less likely to be convinced to go fight a country that you don't know anything about and you don't have any grudges against those people. And I wonder how much of that was, you know, on purpose. Do you think there's something to that?
Yes, I do. But I would also say that since I lived through it and I saw people, you know, I saw people just burn their brains into, you know, fried toast. So I think that there are artists all over the world who got some inspiration from doing a certain amount of drugs. But whether they continue to be artists or they just continue to be drug heads, you know, that's the question. Because, I mean, I saw the downside of that. And it was heavy, very heavy, to the point where people just couldn't, you know, function anymore in any way whatsoever. They were the casualties of the 60s. So, you know, it's an area where the individual decides. Unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals who are idiots. You know, they can't decide or they can't make good decisions. And they don't have any faith in their own imagination without drugs. So everything relies on the drugs, which is total bullshit. Because the drugs aren't producing something that isn't already there. It's not like the drugs invent, well, this guy didn't have any imagination, and now, he smoked a joint, and he does. No, that's not the way it works at all. So, yeah, there's an upside and a downside to that. But, yeah, sure, there was no question about, the CIA, who was very definitely involved in foisting LSD on the public in a covert way, they were not looking to liberate imagination. Excuse me. They were looking to, create chaos and try to destroy the political aspect of the revolution of the 1960s and just turn it into a wasteland. So they were involved as well.
Yeah. I mean, most of my listeners, I'm sure, they're familiar with MK Ultra and all the, just trying, and then also the CIA trying to create a Mandourian candidate and all that stuff. And that's all really, that's real stuff. I mean, that's stuff that you can read on Wikipedia. You don't have to go to some alternative media website to find this information. But I agree. I definitely think that there's something to, psychedelics maybe just being putting gas on a flame, in the sense that you probably already do have those that capability of being artistic, and then you add it and maybe it helps. But I also think that we're also creatures of habit, and we become, our lifestyles there's so little actual like creativity or imagination that goes into when you become a adult. I mean, you wake up at the same time to work, you go to a job that, you more than likely do similar things, similar tasks every day. And then I think that there's something about psychedelics or art or music or whatever that kind of takes you out of that machine-like lifestyle, that that vicious cycle, and then it helps you kind of see things from a different perspective. I seem to get something similar to that when I if I drink and or if I go on a vacation and I just leave my just familiar environment. So I definitely think there's something to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would emphasize the aspect of art. If you walk through a museum and you can put aside some of your preconceptions about what is beautiful or aesthetic or whatever, and just look at everything, then when you walk back out on the street, things are going to look different. There's no way around it. Unless you decide, okay, now I have to snap back into, my patterned existence. Let me give you an example. I've done a lot of research on mind control, and not just the CIA programs and so forth, but all manner of different aspects of mind control. I worked with a colleague named Jack True, who was a brilliant hypnotherapist, late 80s, early 90s. And we developed some research together. People, the human mind, for some reason, tends toward what I would call balanced, symmetrical, geometric forms of perception and appreciation. Oh, I look at this painting and I say, well, it's recognizable. First of all, I can see, the bowl and the fruit and the table and the wallpaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, check mark number one. Number two, there's a certain balance of objects in the painting on the left and the right. There's a kind of a symmetry. I could sketch out the sort of geometric volumes there and see how they harmonize in a certain way and balance and so on and so forth, the sort of classical outlook. And people don't realize to what degree that form of, let's call it symmetrical perception, influences their entire lives, their choices, everything they do, everything they like and everything they don't like. And it's an enormous factor in people's lives. Enormous, right? So now I've carried out a number of, let's call them counter experiments with certain other people, but also mainly myself. For example, there's a thing called microtonal music. An example would be a piano, 88 keys. But if you were to move from the lowest key all the way up to the highest, you would only be hearing notes in one traditional octave of music, which means that it's from note to note, it's going to sound like mud, because there are very small, tiny intervals between the notes on a microtonal piano that's tuned that way. One octave of ordinary sound is carved up into 88 tiny pieces on a microtonal piano. So you play this piano, or you listen to microtonal music, and at first it's just absolute mud. Chaos, means nothing, has no sense to it at all. Why not? How come? Because the human mind has been conditioned to accept certain kinds of harmonies, certain kinds of symmetries and balance and so forth and so on and so on. Right? But now, if you would listen every day for an hour to microtonal music for 6 months, and you could somehow manage to just listen and not make any judgments about what you're listening to, at some point along the line, you're going to start to get glimpses of a whole different universe of meaning that doesn't translate into any written or spoken language, but it's very vivid, immediate, impactful. You might get memories, you might get images, you might get sensations that you haven't felt before or felt for a long time. Something is going to happen because you're actually in a process of deconditioning at a very, very deep level. This is a world of exploration beyond, what we've been talking about so far. And it taps into imagination, perception, the mind, the whole shooting match of answering the question, why do we all live in societies that have these very tight patterns? Why do we have the institutions that we do that work according to very tight and rigid structures? Why is organization overtaking us to the point where it's becoming hyper-organization and secret surveillance and tracking and algorithms that predict human behavior and on and on and on and on and on? Why are we living increasingly in that kind of world? Because the human mind is conditioned to perceive and appreciate that kind of reality and to favor it and to be frightened of anything that would, at some root level, violate that whole system. But beyond it is not just getting rid of that, but there are worlds and universes to explore that go so far beyond that that most people can't even conceive of the possibility.
Yeah, that's and do you think that's, the whole nature versus nurture thing? Do you think that the things that we want or look for, do you think it's something that's man-made, or do you think we're hardwired to be attracted to certain things?
Well, I think that it's mostly nurture. In other words, conditioning. But the problem is, the conditioning is so all present that most people really don't take the chance to get outside it or to try to get outside it. So it goes on and on and on from the first moment of birth to, the grave. But you can break out of it. Now, excuse me, I also think that there are certain, let's call them, basic software in the mind. It's sort of like, okay, let's outfit human beings with a sort of simplistic software so that they can, perceive balance, harmony, symmetry, forms, realism, all of that, to give them, sort of a kickstart. So I think there is that as well. But all of that can be overcome. All of that can be put to the side.
Have you ever heard of the what is it, the 432 hertz tuning? Like that whole thing about there's like specific, like you said, this type of tuning we use in music is it kind of keeps us trapped one place, and if we possibly tuned our music differently, then it would tap into certain things, because there's obviously been a lot of studies on music, on the way it affects our moods, the way we look at things. And have you ever heard of any? Well, I guess for I think it was called like the musical conspiracy, I guess, but I don't know what specifically it was called. But are you familiar with that? Have you ever heard of that?
I have. I haven't really explored it in the sense of the frequencies and so forth, but I'm sure it's true. The thing about it is, though, it's all based on this idea, as you said, changing the mood. Okay, so we play this kind of music for people and they, report feeling this way. Then we pay them that music and they report feeling this way. And this way, see. But the thing is, that's just all of that is just a very limited, tiny part of the potential spectrum, which is infinite. It's sort of like the light spectrum. Okay, so human beings see and perceive within a certain range, limited range of the light spectrum, but that spectrum goes on and on and on and on and on. Well, it's the same way with sound or with music, or with patterns of music, or with certain chords or intervals. I mean, the Catholic Church at one point, had rules about this stuff. You couldn't compose music and get it performed in any church if it violated certain rules about harmony.
Yeah, there were some chords that were banned too, I believe, right? You couldn't play on a guitar or something like that.
Exactly. Could not play those chords because they were thought to be demonic, right? But all of that is in a limited spectrum. So these experiments with frequencies and so forth, yeah, sure, you can make changes in people's mood with certain kinds of music, but what I'm talking about goes way, way further than that. Way further than that. And, people report this all the time if you talk to them and listen to what they have to say. For example, somebody who says, well, I used to only listen to, Bach and Beethoven, a little bit of pop and rock and roll, whatever. But then I started listening to some Schoenberg and Bartok and Stravinsky. And at first I thought it was absolutely disgusting and hideous and whatever. But I thought, let me just keep on listening to it because, maybe there's something there. And then they keep listening to it. And eventually they say, and you know what? It was like a revelation. I suddenly caught on after listening to it for 3 months. I caught on. And why did they catch on? Because they stopped interfering, with their own ideas and judgments about, oh, that's terrible because it doesn't do this and it's not that and it can't be any good because it sounds and that. They put all that aside long enough, and then the wave hit them, and they thought, wow. And they began experiencing emotions that they had never experienced before. So not only is the potential and infinite spectrum of music or sound there. And this was something that I discovered when I was painting, actually. But there is an unlimited spectrum of emotions that is there as well. We are taught, okay, so there's, you can feel this, that, or this. Oh, no, there's actually 12, or no, there's 23. Researchers and, various other bullshitters who are involved with brain experiments and so forth, they want to categorize all of this and say, well, the span of human emotion covers the following range, A through, Q or whatever. That's a total, that's part of the machine. Yeah, if you're in the machine, this is what you can experience. But what happened to me was I was painting these kind of pictographs that I was inventing. It wasn't from any language, and I was doing it on big sheets of board in my studio. And I would do them in rows, and I continue to do these. It's like imaginary languages, if you want to give a name to it. And one day, this was, I think, in 1995 or so, I had, several of these big boards leaning against a wall across from my bed. And I had, put these it was sort of like black on white, black pictograph shapes, some simple, some complicated, that kind of looked like they might be a language. And they were sitting there, and I was lying in my bed looking at them, and all of a sudden, they spoke. I understood. Sensations. That was what was communicated. Non-verbal sensations. And I painted a lot of abstract art and looked at a lot of abstract art, but this was different. This was not like that at all. This was, guess what? You just tapped into a whole other reality.
Yeah.
Welcome aboard. You're now communicating in a language that is immediate, ever-changing, full of explosive impact, high-flying sensations, fantastic feelings that you have rarely, if ever, experienced before. And this is just the beginning. So it's the emotions, too. And this is, perhaps the most, or at least one of the most pervasive and deep forms of mind control that people, A, believe, and 2, experience only a very limited range of emotions. That's a big one. And I've continued to explore and research and work with that for many years now. It goes beyond any kind of sacred geometry, and everything is connected, and you see the same ratio in the snail that you do in the galaxy and all of that stuff. Yeah, because it's all a work of art. This universe is a work of art. It was designed. And if you're going to design a universe, there's a good chance that you're going to put in certain repeating ratios and so forth and so on. Don't get too excited about it. You don't need to fall down on your knees and start worshiping it. You don't have to suddenly start proliferating some huge metaphysical cosmology that explains it all and, go crazy with all of that. It's a painting, all right? It's a work of art. One out of an infinite number of potential works of art or universes. And this one happens to have these repeating symmetries. Okay, let's just, look at it from that angle. It's like if you were to go into a museum and look at certain, Italian Renaissance paintings, and you didn't know anything really about how the laws of geometric perspective worked, you might eventually figure out what the painter was doing in order to create the sense of, 3 dimensions, at which point you would go, wow, I just found the hidden pattern in the painting. Wow, unbelievable. This must have sacred implications, right? It's like, the hidden secret behind the secret behind the secret. Bullshit. It was the way the painter kind of laid out what he was going to do on the canvas. He created a work of art. And yeah, it's very striking, beautiful. Maybe you love it. You think it's a great painting. Piero della Francesca. You want to look at an incredible painting sometime before it was restored, unfortunately. Legend of the True Cross. I mean, there are places in that painting that just, drive you crazy. It's so fantastic. And he was also a mathematician. And he gave up painting at one point and began to write about, mathematics and laws of perspective and ratios and so on and so forth. Yeah, okay, that's what he did. But, that's one creator, one painter, painting his paintings. Now, go into a museum and start looking at, de Kooning. Look at Easter Monday, or the 1955 painting called Composition, 1955, or Gotham News from the same period. Now you're looking at what you would possibly initially say was complete chaos. Absolutely chaos. Madness. Stupidity. Yeah, my 5-year-old could do that. Yeah, okay, maybe so. But go back to that museum every day and stand in front of those paintings for an hour. And after 6 months, something's going to happen to you. You're going to tap into other realities, other forms of imagination.
I definitely think we definitely connect dots sometimes. I think sometimes there is. I mean, obviously with the symbolism, we obviously have a deep rooted history with the Freemasons and in American culture, and there's a lot of symbolism was huge in their just hiding symbols in places and stuff like that, and founding fathers being Freemasons and stuff. But I know there's a documentary on YouTube called Symbols in Plain Sight, and he does a really good job of finding these symbols but. Again, it's one of those things like you said. You made a very good point when you're like, sometimes it's just where the art took that person. And I had Sean Stone on recently, Oliver Stone's son, and we were talking about the same type of thing with symbolism and stuff. And he actually used the example in one of his movies or his father's movies, and I forget what the example was, but he's like, oh, somebody can look at this and say, oh, he did that because he was trying to, using this symbol or he was using that symbol. There's this deep-rooted meaning to it, and he's like, no, it's just was what it was. And so I do see how sometimes there is more, and like you said, it's a secret behind a secret. But other times it is just as simple as that there is nothing there. It's just where the art took it. Yeah,
but also that's right. I mean, I agree with you absolutely. Because these symbols are used over and over and over again in different, cultures and societies through time. So coming upon, I don't know, whatever, a pentagon or a hexagram or whatever, in some society and immediately assuming, well, they must have had a Masonic lodge, in 5,000 years ago, in Palestine or whatever, doesn't necessarily cut it, right? But on the other hand, you take a secret society like the Masons or, the traditional 18th century Illuminati. Yeah, they use symbols. Yeah, they intend to use symbols that have certain meanings, specific meanings that they impart to those symbols. You bet. And they intend to communicate with one another, even through time, with those symbols, sure. And some of these elites, secret societies, definitely have sinister motives, no question about it, which can be discovered. But again, what's the conclusion from that? And I'm not saying, therefore, one shouldn't bother discovering this particular kind of symbol. Absolutely, yeah, flesh it out, but go deeper. You know, this was, if you want to take the Masons, this was their way of inventing their reality that they wanted to foist upon the world. Yeah, which is called art. That's perverse art, and it's backed up by money and power and so forth, because some art is backed up by money and power, and it is perverse. But understand that. It's not that the Masons, you know, when they use the compass or the, whatever, the square or the square inside the circle or whatever, we're tapping into some universal metaphysical truth. Or, you know, they were talking to Satan on the telephone and he was saying, hey, baby, if you use these symbols, you're really going to go far. No. That was their invention. And it can be refuted and rejected and exposed for what it is. So, yeah, sometimes the symbols are just there because somebody grabbed one and said, I like the way this looks, and let's go with it, you know. And sometimes they have imparted meaning intentionally, but so what? So what? I mean, in the sense of, oh, more Masonic above, you know, that attitude. No, just expose it for what it is. And don't get caught in the shock and awe of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's it's, yeah. I mean, there's definitely multiple ways, and that's why I think it's important to have people who kind of don't fall into any type of dogma where it's like, well, I want to believe everything is a symbol meaning something. So, you know, you end up putting these, you know, YouTube videos together, or people end up writing these articles about how, you know, they're hiding this symbol in here. And it's just like, a lot of it's not really, there's not much evidence to prove that there's anything else but that one thing that they found. And I think that there's so many real things out there, so many real issues, so many real conspiracies and you know, real things that have real facts behind it to talk about, that it's like, sometimes I feel like it ends up dismissing people who maybe could be paying attention to real issues, because they're like, oh, isn't that the same guy who also said that in this movie they were just telling you to be a satanic worshiper? So it's just like, it's one of those things where, yeah, you have to kind of, you know, you can't let that line get too blurred between, you know, people actually doing shysty things and then other coincidence, you know, just being a coincidence, and people just connecting dots. And, you know, that's, you know, I think that's where people like you who, and that's why I want to get into another topic that really intrigues me. I actually just had a nutritionist and natural medicine specialist on my last show, and it's I've had Dr. Brzezinski on and Dr. Gregory A. Smith and Mike Adams from Natural News on, and it's a topic that I don't talk enough about, I don't think, because I think it's so important because it affects our health, and a lot of people don't know the history of you know, the medical, just, I guess, history in America, and that's why I was amazed that you broke. Oh, I don't know if you broke the story or you're just investigating it, but I remember you were the first person that I saw talking about the story, the CDC whistleblower, and the connection to vaccines, or the connections with vaccines, and a possible autism connection. And for my listeners who aren't familiar with that story, could you get into it and how you came about it and how you fell into this story?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to sum it up. It's a long tale. First of all, at my website, nomorefakenews.com, in the archive, there's a whole host of stories that I've written about this CDC whistleblower named William Thompson, who on August 27th made a public statement, written statement through his lawyer, Rick Morgan, stating that he, as a researcher at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, 15-year researcher there, had committed fraud in a study that was looking into whether there was a connection between the MMR vaccine and autism, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. And so in the published statement, Thompson said that he and his co-authors had broken the protocol of the study and had omitted vital data. Well, the data that they omitted were in a group of African American children who showed a higher risk for autism in the wake of receiving the MMR vaccine. And if that data had been added into the study, the conclusion of the study would have been a very cautionary note. Hey, watch out, MMR vaccine, autism. But instead, the conclusion was no real connection. Well, that was 2004 when all that went down. And the study was published in a very prestigious journal called Pediatrics. And from that point on, Thompson felt extreme guilt and remorse and conscience about the fact that he had committed fraud and that countless numbers of children were being shot up with the MMR vaccine and risking autism. In a series of anonymous phone calls that were recorded before Thompson published his written confession, Thompson was talking with a PhD engineer, Brian Hooker, and Dr. Andrew Wakefield, whom many people have heard of, who was drummed out of the medical profession in England for even suggesting the possibility that there was a connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. And in these anonymous recorded calls, you could hear the regret, remorse, guilt, and so on, as well as some information that was imparted by the CDC whistleblower. So, one way or another, he was outed. And the stories vary on how that happened. I'm not going to try to go into that. But on August 27th, seeing, I believe, that there was no way for him to avoid being exposed, Thompson published a statement, a confession through his lawyer, Rick Morgan, in Cincinnati. Well, in certain alternative media, that ignited a firestorm because this never happens. I mean, in covering medical stories for 30 years now, I've never seen it, where an author, and Thompson is still employed at the CDC to this day, an author of a very vital study on a very vital subject, vaccine damage, autism, comes out of the closet and confesses fraud and accuses his other co-authors, of which there were 3 or 4, of also committing fraud in collusion at the CDC. And 2 of those co-authors, Frank DiStefano and Colleen Boyle, are not simply co-authors. They are high-ranking executives as well at the CDC in the arena of vaccine safety. So this is a motherfucker of a scandal. And I'll add one more element to that before I talk about media coverage. In 2004, around the same time, but apparently before, I have to say before this study was published, Thompson, who was, just nervous to the point of imminent collapse, wrote a letter to the head of the CDC, Dr. Julie Gerberding, saying, look, I'm on tap to present vital info on the MMR vaccine at an upcoming conference on vaccines and autism. And my data are troubling. And I got to know what to do here. And so Thompson went around his own boss, sent the letter to Julie Gerberding, saying, look, this is a heads up. We're in trouble here. Come on. What am I going to do? Do I lie? Keep lying? Do I tell the truth and risk God knows what calamity when the world now knows about the connection between the vaccine and autism? I mean, what the hell do I do? Well, she never answered his letter. And his appearance at that conference never happened. However, and here's the capper, let's fast forward to 2009. Julie Gerberding, the head of the CDC, leaves her job, and at some point after that, and to this day, becomes the president of Merck Vaccines, which manufactures the MMR vaccine.
Wow.
Now, this is a motherfucker of a story. I mean, just as a reporter, as a cold-blooded reporter in the mainstream, looking at all of this is a motherfucker of a story.
That's why it's amazing that you've been one of the only people that have been that have been talking about this.
Right. That's my point.
When I first heard this story, and I'm just like, oh, this is gonna blow up everywhere. I'm like, this is gonna, and then the only person I ever see talk about this was you, and then Mike Adams from National News when he had you on, so it was still kind of you, and so it was just one of these things. I'm like, how is this not making just every headline all over the U.S.? It's like, this is unbelievable, especially when there's already so many people who are skeptical about vaccines. The idea that you're shooting a bunch of shit into a child that hasn't been exposed to any bacteria yet. I mean, we've all come to the conclusion that your body, obviously, when it gets sick, the immune system gets a little stronger or whatnot. We understand that. But this kid's just born. It hasn't even had any time to get sick or be exposed to anything to strengthen that immune system. And you're just shooting it up with stuff that we're not even sure what's in it. So, I mean, the fact that, there's all these concerned mothers and parents and stuff that should probably know about this, it's amazing to me that nobody's talking about it.
Okay, so actually a number of alternative media, have been covering this since the beginning. Age of Autism, Autism Media Channel, Mike Adams, InfoWars, Red Ice, Celia Farber, lots of people in the alternative media have been covering it since the beginning, including me. But that only testifies, at greater length to the fact that there's been a major media blackout of the whole story. I mean, it's gotten a few scant articles, but nothing really, nothing. It's a blackout, a total blackout. Right. And then there's the medical press in America, which is very, very sensitive to this whole idea of, say, plagiarism or fraud, blah, 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 blah. They cover everything they can. Nothing. Oh, yes, and blah, 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 but, really not so, and and that's the end of it. Right. I mean, this is a concerted effort to totally black out the story and pretend it never happened. And when you look, as I have, at where the major media are these days in terms of their financial position, I mean, the New York Times has refinanced the refinancing of the financing to keep themselves afloat. The LA Times, which used to be on Sunday so heavy that you could hardly carry it, now, a 3-year-old could carry it. These things are going down the tubes. What they need is explosive stories that will put them back on the map. And they have the means and the personnel to cover them as nobody else does. If I were the editor or publisher of the New York Times and decided to, suddenly break ranks, aside from hiring a significant private security force, I would say to my reporters, okay, I want you assholes to wake up and realize that you came into this world of journalism in order to do something important and, to have an adventure. So I've got a story for you. Here it is. For the next year, I want you to go out and pound the pavement, disturb the bushes, get people to come out and make statements, do a Watergate, They will come out of the woodwork, rats deserting the sinking ship. You will get doctors and medical bureaucrats and all kinds of people to confess. And we're going to build this up into the biggest story we've ever covered. And then we're going to go to the other vaccines, and we're not going to stop. This is going to be page one stuff. And you guys will all have bylines. And we are going to print 2 editions a day on the newsstand. We'll print some of it online, but, the real juice that people are going to want is going to be in the print edition. And we're going to sell millions of papers and make a fortune. I don't care how many advertisers from the pharmaceutical industry desert the sinking ship, which they think we are, and scream and yell. I don't care what the CDC says. I don't care about any of that crap. We will get new advertisers who will come on board. And we'll save this paper and put it in the black. And we will become, the most famous media outlet in the world. But you see, they're not doing that because they're part of the problem. They're part of the establishment. They're part of the government corporate marriage. They're part of the invention of fake realities. Vaccines are safe and effective and rarely have any adverse effects. They're part of all that shit. They are not just, covering it with laudatory stories. They're inside, They're part of the inventors of all this fake reality. And so they don't do it. Nobody does it. But there it is. The story is still there. The story is still hanging. There may be a congressional hearing. There may not be. I don't know. We'll see. The story is still alive. It's not going anywhere. William Thompson, the whistleblower, is still working at the CDC. He's not talking to reporters. He said he's not going to talk to reporters. I can see why he wouldn't want to.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is that a lot of people don't realize for vaccines, in 86, they had the National Child Vaccine Injury Act, where basically you can't, you have to go to, a specific type of a federal claims court. And there's been families that have been awarded money that I don't think those outcomes are public, right? So it just basically...
Yeah, I mean, you can see the total. I think it's $3 billion so far or something. But yeah, if you or your child is injured by a vaccine, you can no longer sue the vaccine manufacturer. That's because the manufacturers came to the federal government in the 1980s and said, we're going to get out of the vaccine business because we got too many lawsuits against us for vaccine injuries. And we can go broke if we don't watch ourselves unless you, the government, step in. And I've been criticized for saying the obvious here, but the people that criticize me don't know what they're talking about. This was a deal. This is a deal cooked up by the federal government and the vaccine manufacturers. The deal was, okay, no more lawsuits against the manufacturers. Everybody has to go through the vaccine compensation system, which is a nightmare of red tape and abuse and humiliation, in order for parents to try to get some compensation for the fact that their kid has brain damage from vaccines and is not leading anything faintly resembling a normal life. So that has all, that's all water under the bridge now. And there are various horror stories of parents trying to get, awards from the government for vaccine damage. So yeah, the whole thing is a massive collusion. And on top of that, governments are obligated by contracts that they've signed to buy vaccines. Long after, suppose, for example, it's long after anybody's heard about Ebola, and Glaxo says, okay, we're ready to release the Ebola vaccine. Well, Governments are committed to buy it and stockpile. Oh, we got this new thing called V23Q, testicular globular virus that's killing people in Antarctica, and it could spread to the entire universe if we don't watch out. So we're making a vaccine. Good. Government's contracted to buy it. No research on whether this is a real epidemic, a phony epidemic, whatever. It's a done deal. So the vaccine manufacturers are protected. They're protected against claims. They're protected against going broke. Their sales are guaranteed. They're living high off the hog while poisoning untold numbers of people all over the planet. And with that, I got to run.
That's a good way of ending it.
Yeah, right.
Hey, thanks, John. I really appreciate your time. I love your work. I've been, going to your website for articles for a long time, and I know you're right. I've heard you on Red Ice Radio. I've heard you on a couple places. So there are alternative media sources talking about this story. It's unfortunate something that affects so many families and people isn't all over mainstream media. But obviously, like you said, there's doorkeepers and their gatekeepers and people who just can't let that happen because of the sponsorship and they don't want to lose access to these politicians and stuff like that. So yeah, it's all bullshit. But the nice thing, we do have nofakenews.com, nomorefakenews.com, John's website, which you can keep up with his work. You can also follow him on Twitter, on I believe you have a Facebook account too. I believe you can follow, right, for No Fake.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nomorefakenews.com.
Yeah, and keep up with them, and you'll see them on all over the place, all those alternative news media places. And investigative journalist is kind of a dying breed, so it's nice to still have guys like you and Russ Baker and a few of you guys still left doing it, because like I said, there's not many.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Okay, you too.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Another great episode. John's just easy to talk to, and I think I do my best shows when I'm comfortable and relaxed, and I think some of it has to do with John and also the topics, because I think talking about music and nutrition and the medical world and just natural medicines and all that stuff, they're all just things I'm really passionate about, so it just makes it easy for me to talk about. And I wish we had a little bit more time. I'll have him on again. We'll talk more into the Rockefellers and their influence on medicine. And but if you guys are listening, definitely check out, just Google the term or the word, the family name Rockefeller, and then AMA, and you'll find articles, or even the Carnegie Foundation and the Flexer report, Flexer FLEXNER report, and find out how that basically got rid of alternative medicine. When I say alternative, I mean natural medicines, natural remedies, and really just became the gatekeepers on anybody trying to learn alternative medicine and trying to be a doctor, and just really changed the whole medical field and what we consider a doctor and what we consider medicine. And also, I know Gary Knowles, which I talked about a little bit briefly on my last podcast with Nancy Gabberti. I talked about his documentary Vaccination, and he also did one, War on Health, or War on Healthcare. I think it's War on Health. And check out his stuff. Natural News with Mike Adams, and there's definitely a lot to it. There's I know sometimes things seem like conspiracy theories and people have a hard time believing it, but there's a real link between that and the Rockefellers and medicine. James Corbett did a great video called Rockefeller Medicine, which you guys can check out. That's online, and I highly recommend checking that out. It really goes into the whole history of how they influence the medical field. And Bayer, for example, they had a story where they paid millions in HIV because of HIV infected blood products, and it was just thousands of people died because of this. And another story that really didn't make much news, and it's amazing. It's amazing to kind of look into these things. And Bayer also, I know they bought a company called IG Farben, I think is the name of the company, IG Farben. And it's a German pharmaceutical company that gave tons of campaign money to Hitler. And then they're one of the guys that were on their board ended up becoming or being on the board of Bayer. And he was a war criminal, and he became a chairman of the board for Bayer. And I think his name was like Fritz Fritz Tamir or something like that. And I know I should really have some of this stuff written down, or any stuff that I do have written down. I should have more than just like 2 words. But there's so many topics I hit on every show that I write sometimes so much shit down that I never even end up getting to. So, but if you just look up into that, I mean, you'll find this stuff. This stuff's online, and a lot of it's on Wikipedia, which is amazing. Some of the things we talk about on this show, you would think you're only find on like a Alex Jones, Infowars.com, but no, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just on, it's on Wikipedia. You can find this stuff. And I've said this recently on a podcast, just, you look at just how much information's out there, and it's okay because it happened a long time ago, because it becomes like a historical event and people don't relate it to today, or they almost are detached from it because it didn't happen recently. And so it's weird how like certain things, no matter how fucked up it is, if it's MK Ultra, wow, I can't talk today. MK Ultra, and they're linked to that really being a Nazi program that came over with Operation Paperclip, and then they continued it, and they use a lot of the German scientists and psychologists who really should have been prosecuted as war criminals and stuff like that. I mean, all that stuff is on Wikipedia. It's fucking crazy, and I just think it's amazing that people still think a lot of this stuff is just conspiracy theory. It's, they get grouped in with the reptilians and stuff like that, and I just think that there's, and I guess, who am I to make fun of any conspiracy theory, and outside of the ones that I guess I believe, because I think that there's a lot of these things, sometimes they do end up being true, but I just think that there's so many conspiracy theories that have truth to them, that there's links to real facts, real people, real events, that it's hard to waste time on some of these other things that are a little far-fetched to believe, or just harder to believe, and really isn't much evidence besides people connecting dots. So so I think that's important. His book, he wrote a book, Jon Rappoport wrote a book called AIDS Inc., I believe is the title of it, and that's interesting. He's really informative with AIDS too, so next time I have him on, we'll talk about that. And I know that Joe Rogan also had a scientist once that was debating the idea that when they look for AIDS in your body, when they test you for it, they actually find that the antivirus. So what they're saying is your body's actually basically creating the antivirus already, and then eventually, or HIV, I should say, and then what happens is that your immune system weakens from all the pharmaceutical drugs and treatment that they give you, and then that's what ends up killing you. And it's your lack of strength of immune system. It's not really the actual virus itself. And it seems like an interesting concept, because I wonder if you can strengthen your immune system using natural remedies, diets, or whatever, if some way you could fight AIDS, and cure yourself of it naturally. And it seems like logically kind of makes sense. I know people like Jennifer McCarthy who kind of get laughed at in mainstream media and on TV and stuff like that. But and Suzanne Summers, who didn't use chemotherapy to fight breast cancer, and she fought it and she won, and she wrote a book called Knockout talking about it and talking about all these alternative doctors. But Jennifer McCarthy, she talked about how she found all these natural remedies and stuff like that to help she says kind of cure her son of autism. But I wonder if there's some truth to that, if maybe she didn't, or I think his symptoms got better, and I think she said cure, but she really meant like the symptoms got better. And there's a lot of people who believe that those vaccines did have a link to autism, and vaccination kind of tells a couple of stories like that. I know I have a friend, George, who his wife was telling me the other day how his son had all these, basically was healthy, no problems, and once she's convinced that these vaccines, or a vaccine specifically, caused his peanut allergies, and so it just it's interesting to think that there are people out there who do have firsthand experiences with their kids and say that there could be a link to it. So my thing is that natural remedies, vitamins, they come from food. They come from, I know there's doctors out there and studies that say, oh, they don't do anything, but that's like saying food doesn't do anything. And it comes from food, it comes from plants. So the same way that eating foods that are good for you help make you healthier, it would only make sense if those minerals and vitamins from those foods, if they're compressed into a small pill, if you take it, it would do the same thing. So it only makes sense, and it doesn't harm your body. So make sure that pharmaceutical drugs are a last resort. And if you're listening to this show and you haven't listened to early in the podcast, my podcast career, I was lucky enough to have Dr. Brzezinski on and his fight with the FDA over his cancer treatment. Check that out. Check out a show I had soon after that, which was with Gregory A. Smith, who did the film American Addict, which will really get into the politics of pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. And it's a really informative documentary, which you can find on Netflix. And Brzezinski, there's actually been 2 documentaries based on his story too, which will blow your mind. And I know it's the first Brzezinski movie is on YouTube, and it's just called Brzezinski, so definitely check that out. That's one of those films that people who watched it, they had the same feeling I had, and it felt like somebody lied to you and you were in the Matrix, because to find out that publicly, I mean, this is all real events, really happened. This guy went all the way, fought the FDA, went to the federal, to Supreme Court. I mean, fighting the FDA, and they really had no proof that there was any side effects or anything. I mean, it's just a film that will blow your mind. So if you get the time, definitely check it out, Brzezinski, and then check out that podcast, and then Dr. Gregory A. Smith from American Addict, and check that out. And, just learn about this stuff. And check out my last podcast if you haven't heard about it, or you haven't listened to it yet, with Nancy Gaberti in regards to natural medicines and herbs and stuff like that, and her amazing story of going from working for Goldman Sachs and having a dream job to getting into medicines and stuff like that because her son got sick, and really her doing her research into alternative medicines and natural remedies really just changed her perspective, and she got really passionate. And now, instead of doing something that financially makes sense, she's doing something that, and maybe she's very successful doing this too, but she didn't just do it because of the money, she did it because of the passion, and she wanted to help people. And I think that comes through when on the last podcast when I talked to her. So also, if you guys don't know, my new Theory 6 EP came out. The Ripple Effect is the name of the EP, and definitely check that out. It's on Google Play, and as singles, for some reason, it's on iTunes. It should be out as a full EP very soon on iTunes, and also it'll be out on Amazon and Shazam and everywhere you can find music. So check that out. It's a great way to support the show. And what else? I think that's everything for now. I got some awesome shows coming up, but I'm not going to give away any names or dates or times or anything, because I'm always afraid that something's going to change, and then you're going to end up waiting for a guest that you thought was on or coming on, and then maybe the show won't happen for another month or so. But look out, because I do have a bunch of shows coming up this month, and I think that's everything. So subscribe, follow us on Facebook, follow me on Twitter at RVTheory6, and keep up with shows and guests and all that stuff. And if you have any suggestions or questions for any guests or anything like that, if I ever end up just, I guess, telling you ahead of time on Twitter or whatever of an upcoming guest, and you have any questions that you want me to forward to the guest that you think would be a good topic to hit on, definitely hit me up. I'm more than willing to read messages and listen to suggestions and stuff like that. So hopefully you guys enjoy the fact that every show is a little different, and I have musicians and comedians and all that stuff and all that crap. So I think that's everything for now. I probably rambled enough, and you guys probably turned it off once you realized that the guest was gone, but hopefully not. So like I said, support the show with the Theory 6 music. Look out for the upcoming shows, and I'll see you guys next time. I really appreciate everybody who's listening. This is kind of a dream come true that doesn't pay really well. So I'm glad that you people are listening, and I'm super happy that this has taken off to the point where I can get guests like Jon Rappoport, and just email people or contact them in one way or another, and they're willing to come on, thanks to a bunch of really awesome guests that came on before them that helped build a little bit of a resume. So thanks again to the listeners, thanks again to the guests, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.
Believe in the ripple effect.